Hi, everyone. Welcome to our pre-recorded session with BlackRock on driving DEI and allyship through ERG and BRG collaboration. My name is Shaun Amabile. I identify as a white gay male. My pronouns are he and him. I sit in right outside of New York City in New Jersey. I am wearing a gray sweatshirt with the BlackRock Pride logo. I have a plant to the right of me and a picture that I painted of mountains reflecting in water to the left of me. And I'm joined today by three of my amazing colleagues, peers, and friends from the Out and Allies Network. We have our couple members here today and an ally joining to really have this conversation as a fireside chat. And so I will introduce you to our other colleagues that are here joining us today. But first, I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about our ERG and BRGs at BlackRock to set the stage, because we actually call them networks at BlackRock. And so you'll often hear us referring to our networks. And we're really here to talk to you all today about how you can also drive DEI through allyship and through collaborating together with your ERG and BRGs. And I'm sure many of you already do, but just sharing some really helpful best practices that have really worked for us. So we're super excited to be here today. I'm going to go to the next slide here just to show you um, what our networks here look like. So you'll notice that we have a main network called Mosaic at the top. It's kind of like an umbrella for the other networks. It brings all of our different networks or all of our ERG and BRGs together into a community where we can all share best practices, one another, collaborate with each other on events that might make sense for multiple identities or multiple communities. We have our employee networks, our professional networks, and our impact networks. And we're here primarily mostly to talk to you today about our employee networks. And so as you can see here, we have our Ability and Allies Network, our Asia, Middle Eastern and Allies Network, our Black Professionals and Allies Network, our Families and Allies Network, our Out and Allies Network, our Somos Latinx and Allies Network, our Veterans and Allies Network, and our Women's Initiative and Allies Network. You will notice that we do have professional networks. Those are based on our corporate titles, so you can get all of our analysts together, all of our associates together, our VPs, our admins, and executive assistants. And then we have impact networks, which are a force for good inside and outside of BlackRock. Those are our financial inclusion team, our Gives network, which focuses on social impact, and our Green Team network, which focuses on ESG. So with that being said, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and introduce you to my colleagues here. And I'm going to start with you, Whitney, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. Yeah, my name is Whitney. I identify as a white queer woman with a chronic illness. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also one of the America's co-chairs for the Out and Allies Network.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney.
Oh, and I also, sorry, I wanted to give a description of myself. I have brown hair. I'm a white woman. I have green eyes. I'm wearing a white sweater, and there's nothing in my background because my apartment is messy, so I blurred it out.
Thanks, Whitney. Candace?
Hi, and firstly, thanks Shaun, Whitney, and Bryce for having me as an ally. My name is Candace. I am a member primarily of our Black Professionals and Allies Network, and I co-chair operating committee there, but am an ally to the Out Network at BlackRock and feel very grateful to be included in this conversation. I identify as a Black heterosexual female. And I am sitting in Oakland. I work in the BlackRock San Francisco office, so living just a little bit off of into the East Bay. I'm right now in my dining room. So what you can see behind me is a mirror, a bookshelf, and a bit of a plant. I'm dressed in a black shirt. My hair is pulled back. It's also black, dark brown. And that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you, Candace. And Bryce?
Hello, thank you everyone for inviting me. My name is Bryce, and I identify as a non-binary trans individual who was born hard of hearing deaf, so I wear hearing aids in both ears. I am usually based in APAC, particularly in Tokyo, but I'm in my parents' house in North Carolina as of right now. So what you can see behind me is a basically a painting of trees and a very cool toned meditation room essentially. And my appearance, I have very long curly brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm white, essentially wearing a gray shirt. So I'm really looking forward to talking to everyone and really getting into the meat and gritty about ERGs and collaboration. Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you all. And yeah, this is really exciting to really be here today. And it really is such an important topic. And it hits near and dear to my heart personally because I just love seeing how our different ERGs come together to really support one another. And I know we're going to have a lot to uncover today. But just wanted to, again, remind you all, Candace, Whitney, Bryce, I have a couple of topics that I want to discuss with each of you, but this is a true fireside chat. We should all be jumping in. Please bounce off of each other's ideas, share anything that's on your mind, and feel free to interrupt me at any given time. So I do want to start out by talking a little bit more about Mosaic and allyship and how our networks come together. And so, Bryce, if you could talk to us a little bit about the structure of Mosaic and allyship and give us an example of maybe something that has come out of best practice sharing through the Out and Allies network, that would be great.
Thank you, Shaun. So Mosaic, as Shaun mentioned earlier, is really a network of networks. It's one of our overarching networks that helps bring all of the people together from the respective networks, and it actually provides a platform where we can share what our objectives are, what our goals are, what potential opportunity for collaboration can exist in. And before that, there wasn't a more formal way for all of us to come together. So Mosaic was really the first chance and the first clear, intentful collaboration tool or network for us. So I think that was one of the really great things of creating Mosaic and really patchworking all of our networks together. For the allyship, and one of the examples for Out and Allies was before we became Out and Allies, we were just out, and we noticed that a lot of there were not as many members as we would have liked. And this was really based on feedback that people who are not part of the LGBTQ community maybe did not feel like they could be part of this network because it was called out, and maybe there was some personal stigma for people themselves to join the group, even though they may have felt that they were supportive, or maybe those who are teetering on, being an ally and maybe did not want to be mislabeled as someone who's part of the LGBT community. So that's a very real concern, and we wanted to ensure that we could remove the confusion that would inhibit some people from joining. So Out eventually decided to include the allyship part into the label, as Shaun has shown in the previous slide, which allowed and really clearly stated that this was a network for LGBT community as well as allies. And this could also help those who are more questioning and may not really be comfortable with joining a group and finally feel safe as an ally, at least in the beginning of their introduction to this. So that was one of the first moments where we really expressed the importance of allyship, and Out led the way and really started to build a training program to help our allies of the LGBT community understand a little bit more and get educated. So in one of these Mosaic calls where all of these different networks, including AMP and Abilities Network, BPN, etc., we're really surprised and very pleased to hear and see that Out was doing such a great job at one, providing a space for allies to learn and develop themselves and really setting up the tone that anyone can join regardless of your identity, that other networks started to raise their hands and wanting to, hey, like basically say that we want a little bit on this, and it just spread like wildfire. Essentially now, as you can see from the slide before, pretty much all of our networks have attached and allies to their network name. And we have found that has been a really successful best practice. Really putting it with the network's label really does give everyone more permission to finally come together and say, hey, maybe I'm not Black, or maybe I am not someone who is disabled, but I want to show my interest in supporting and really pushing forward an inclusive environment. How do I do that? It's really the first step of saying how can I do that? So I think that was the first best practice and one of the first really great launches of the benefits of having a good network like Mosaic, which brings us all together. But I don't want to speak too much, but does anyone else have something that they want to contribute to that specific notion of allyship?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, Bryce, that was the change that Out made to be Out and Allies really was the catalyst for a lot of other networks to essentially call in allies who I think had felt excluded by our names before. So now we're Black Professionals and Allies Network, which I think speaks to, you know, how we want all members of the BlackRock environment and ecosystem to feel invested in our mission, which is really about advancing and giving opportunities to Black professionals, but anyone can be involved in it, right? And only if we work collaboratively and collectively can we do it. So I think that was a really great opportunity, like I said, to call everybody in. And I loved what you said about giving permission. I think it made people feel more comfortable and give themselves permission to, you know, be introspective and think about the positions they had themselves, the positions of power they sat in, how they could use their privilege to help others across the firm and in these networks.
And
Yeah.
Candace, oh, sorry, Whitney, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add also that I think for me as a network leader, we in the Out network, and I know the other networks feel the same, take the allyship piece across networks really seriously as well. And so I think having that in our names is a good constant reminder to hold ourselves accountable to showing up for the other network groups as well. And there have been a number of times when, you know, something has happened to a particular identity group in the world that is represented in one of our employee networks here, and the other networks have shown up, you know, all the way to like share messaging about what's going on, to pass along, you know, any like emails or content that's shared with that specific network to our own network, so that people aren't getting siloed in their identity groups and they're still accessing, you know, the information and the experience about those other folks, and really trying to show up as networks for other networks in allyship as well. So not just as individuals.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Whitney. And I was actually going to touch on something similar because, you know, I have to say, I do find the allyship programming to be extremely impactful. And I've heard a ton of really great feedback from allies on how they now feel that they had a little bit more of an education and feel more comfortable to help a particular community. And one example for myself was, I'll never forget when we started talking you know, in 2020 about racial equity in the workplace shortly after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. As a white male, I was constantly asking the Black Professionals and Allies Network, what can we do to help? And there was a whole ton of content that I learned about and things that I can do where maybe I can help on the education piece, right? Train up myself on what's going on and educate others, right? And so that was one example where I felt like I was a strong ally. And it's interesting because our different networks and our ERGs or BRGs put out these sort of like ally toolkits or specific things or actions that allies can do. And it makes it easy and it makes it feel more comfortable too, right? And even just for all of our different communities, language, right? There's so much language that we all need to learn about and educate others about. And so I find it really awesome that we're able to do this in a safe place. And I was hoping, Candace, maybe you can touch a little bit more on allyship and maybe some experiences that you might have encountered through the years or admired through the years or learned through the years.
Yeah.
So I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so Shaun, you said before about like what are some best practices that we found. I think one of the ways that we at BPN specifically, right, we think about how communities who are historically excluded, who are minority populations, can come together and really amplify messages so that we're using the scale, the size of our infrastructure as networks to help each other out. One specific way we do that is through the amplification of statements, through sharing emails, through sharing events, and really just trying to reach more people through the systems of our networks. But when we think about that in terms of like amplification, we also think about how we can collaborate across commonalities and shared experiences. So one thing that BPN often does is actually in partnership create events, and some things we've done this year. We've created investment-focused programming with our Somos network, which is our Latinx identifying network for people at the firm, and in addition to working with some of our actual internal professional teams, we've really felt like that was an opportunity for internal mobility and advancing that conversation among Black and Latinx employees. We've worked with our WIN network to really run women's events that are focused on women in the workplace, and sponsored that with WIN, which is the name, and FAB, which is Families at BlackRock. We've worked with Out Directly, and I think it was in mid-February, hosted an event with Christopher Riano on his book to really drive conversation around that. Even did a Pride Month collab event based out of Seattle, which I think was really amazing, to highlight, Black people's role in the ballroom culture, which is, I think, an amazing intersection between, our Out network and the LGBTQIA plus community and Black community, that has also, had a huge cultural awakening, given, the success of shows like Pose and Legendary, and we thought it was a really nice time to highlight that together. We work with our vet network, which is our veterans at BlackRock Network, to talk about opportunities with the Texas retirement system, for example. So there's all these things that we're doing where we're thinking about how we can come together and increase the scale and increase the reach of our messages, and really amplify the things that we think are important, and also to draw out these commonalities, right? It's easy for people to think about their own identities and lose sight of the things that we're experiencing that are similar, because we are, and to be quite frank, some of us are in oppressed, we have oppressed identities, and we feel that oppression quite individually. So I think it's really important that we are always thinking inclusively, not only along the lines of our own communities, but across them all.
Yeah, that was powerful. I think, just thinking back to that, I attended an event maybe a year or two ago, which was multiple networks: our families network, our disability network, our Out and Allies network, and a couple of other different networks on adoption, right?
Mm-hmm.
And certain topics really work across multiple identities. So I just love the power of how our networks come together. And again, like we have talked about even just in the title of session, like our networks working together, we firmly believe helps us to drive our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Collaborating with one another, we come across multiple identities, and we really work together to support one another, to be there for one another, show up for one another. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. I wanted to talk more about like how now we know that our networks work together, right? We can all support one another. And the idea is that we talked about allyship and how doing this ultimately helps us to drive our DEI strategy. And a big piece of that, I think, is on inclusion and belonging, and how the power of Mosaic for us, which is bringing all of our ERGs together and working together so closely and collaborating, ultimately drives our DEI strategy. So Whitney, I was hoping that maybe you can speak to the group a little bit about inclusion and belonging, and how you feel that this really does help to drive DEI and inclusion and belonging at the firm.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. I mean, I think, I always say that there's no downside to thoughtful allyship. And I think it does need to be thoughtful. But, when you think about some of the things that come from allyship, right? You're making space for folks who maybe aren't ready to let everyone know that they identify as part of that group. They're not ready to sort of come out in whatever way that is. Gives them space to come in as an ally and test the waters. For somebody who could be a member of multiple groups. Like, you know, think about this idea of intersectionality, and we all only have so much time, and each of our different identities that we hold impacts our experience in the way that we are experience the world and the world experiences us. And, you know, I think I've certainly interacted with some, had some conversations with employees at BlackRock who felt that they had to choose which employee network they could dedicate their time to, because we only have so many hours in a day. And so you have to kind of pick which slice of your identity you're going to focus on. And when we create opportunities for allyship, we also create those bridges for each of us to sort of step into those other conversations and participate in them, and make sure that each part of our own identity and our peers and friends and coworkers' identities are being, you know, are getting time to shine and talk about and be cared for, I think, which is a really important part of DEI, is that like care aspect. And I think, you know, the other part of it for me that I think a lot about is education. Like we, when we have allyship programming, we are also facilitating opportunities for practice for people who don't normally get it. So, you know, if an individual who doesn't have anybody in their immediate world who identifies as LGBTQ plus and doesn't know how doesn't feel comfortable with their language, doesn't know what questions they can ask, they can come in as an ally, they can listen to our programming, and they can start to get some practice and also meet some people, right? If they don't know anybody in their life, now they do. And so I think all of that promotes more inclusion in the workplace. It promotes more empathy in the workplace. It builds relationships with people. And, you know, in a really critical way for policy at any company. And I think, you know, at BlackRock as well, we need our leaders to be our allies. You know, I think our industry, like many industries, are still working really hard on increasing representation of historically excluded groups in leadership. I know that's something BlackRock is really committed to right now. And so what we need is our leaders to be involved in these conversations also. We need them to be coming to our programs and our events and talking and learning and understanding why these things are so important to us, and building some empathy for each individual employee's experience, so that they can drive policy changes, so that they can drive, you know, what kinds of big goals the firm is working towards in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think allyship kind of like facilitates all of that work. It makes it all a lot easier, a lot like a little bit less work, because you have those relationships, you have that practice. Yeah.
Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, and I think, you know, you brought up so many good points, education being one, right? And we constantly talk about BlackRock, like, you know, you need to be a student of the markets, you need to be a student of your people, right? Our colleagues. We all have a role to play in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you feel that you don't, there are so many different opportunities here within the networks where you can have that education piece and you can learn. And we put on so many different programs and bring in wonderful speakers and have, you know, sometimes even our own employees sharing different stories that they might have themselves. Does anyone have anything that they can think about, maybe a particular program that they were able to attend, or an event that we had hosted that really hit home, and helped you maybe feel like you belonged at the firm a little bit more, where you can maybe speak to it a little bit? I'll pause there and see if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I can come in, jump in. You know, I have been leading out and allies in Japan and ability to network across the APAC region. And, you know, as I mentioned my identity in the beginning, I identify as like non-binary trans individual, and I also am hard of hearing. I was born without my hearing. So I, I think being able to share the intersectionality of my experience, because someone who's disabled from the perspective of others will have a very niche community within the LGBT community as well, and vice versa. There are varying ostracizations that happen when you have intersectional experiences. And I really like you bringing up the ballroom experience, because I'm also very, very close to that community as well. But in BlackRock and with collaboration with our impact networks like Gives, I was able to collaborate with some of our NPOs and NGOs across Japan and other APAC regions where we could, try to visualize and try to, create opportunity for people with similar intersectional identities. Maybe we do not see them and have representation within the office, but if we start to support and bring in people from outside of the office, it was really, really, really helpful. So I was able to work this year and provide a grant to an NGO that I really, really care for in Japan, where they are working on ensuring and creating career center for trans people in Japan who have a disability, particularly mental health or physical disability, because we know the overlay of having a trans identity and being out about that while also carrying a disability, it makes your job hunting and the job searching experience really, really difficult. And being able to, collaborate and then bring the speakers in to share that kind of experience kind of made me feel a little bit more validated in my own experience and like be able to pass that on. So that really created like a strong sense of belonging for myself and to feel like I could do something with the great name that BlackRock has and within my own network within BlackRock. So that was one really, really powerful thing. And it's still going on this day. In other situations, because I've been able to do that in Asia Pacific region, we don't really talk about the queer or trans experience because we're not quite there as far as language goes. But because I've been able to collaborate and work outside of BlackRock and within BlackRock with our global communities in there, I have been able to be a little bit more and more open and more definitive about my identity and feel more comfortable to do so because the allyship and the way that people have been able to show up, lean in, and feel comfortable and ask questions. I can safely say that BlackRock has been one of the most safe work environment that I've ever been because of this kind of environment and allowing and giving permission to people to be able to share their stories, use their networks, and really be able to create safe spaces. So I just wanted to share that because I think one of the important things about our network is not just the internal aspect, but also the community building piece, which has really, really been impactful for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bryce. That was so powerful. And thank you for sharing a little bit more about your story and your experience. And I love that you talked about the aspect of community. When we talk about our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy at BlackRock, we have a 3-pillar approach. So we talk about talent and culture, both inside and outside of BlackRock, future talent, our existing talent. We talk about our role as a fiduciary to our clients. And then we also talk about social impact and public policy and, working with the communities in which we operate in. And how do we drive DEI across those 3 different pillars? So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Candace, Whitney, I want to see it over to you all to see if there's a particular event or program or moment through the networks that made you feel included or like you belonged here at the firm.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly and just say that, well, this isn't exactly what you asked, but I feel like as a network leader, I'm in a particular position to act as a buffer. And that's usually said in a negative way, but in this instance, I mean, there's experiences that people are living through that they're dealing with that they can't necessarily or don't feel comfortable really elevating and escalating to the powers that be in DEI, in talent, in their management groups. And I feel like the networks really do a great job as acting as that safe space to really share those lived experiences and then qualify some of the things that we see in data, some of the things that we hear in aggregate, but to really get those individual experiences and to share those through to our leadership so that they can take action. And to me, that feels like a privilege, but also a responsibility, right? To make sure that I am learning about different intersecting identities, to being a good ally so that I can understand and have empathy. So I just wanted to bring that up.
That's such a great point, Candace, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that because for me, I think that there's not one specific event, but having the privilege and responsibility of being a network leader I've had so many conversations with individual employees that have been personally eye-opening for me, that have facilitated that connection, but also have allowed me to share their experience with others without them having to make themselves vulnerable in that way, And so I think about one thing that's been on my mind a lot is return to office. How does that impact people with specific identities differently than others, right? I think about an employee who talked to me about their experience as an autistic person and the burden that puts on them commuting and coming to the office and the stimulation in the office and how that impacts their performance. I think about an employee who shared with me the sort of gender euphoria experience that they've been having working from home and being able to wear nail polish when they wouldn't feel comfortable in the office or something like that. And so, we're 18 months into this pandemic experience. So I think we've all participated in a lot of conversations like this, but the experience of being in the closet doesn't end when you come out for a person whose identity is not necessarily visible. And so, we're sort of coming out all the time. And I think it's really easy also at times to kind of like put that on the back burner and talk about it less. And then that can slowly make you feel less included in the workplace, less safe in the workplace. And so I think for me as a network leader, like just all these conversations, getting to talk to employees and hear about what's their unique lived experience, and then how can I, as somebody with this responsibility and privilege of being a network leader, how can I communicate that to those who need to hear it, to make sure that we're improving the experience every day of employees at BlackRock.
And I love that you brought that up again, Whitney, because I want to keep going back to the overall point of how our networks ultimately, by working together, and even just the networks in general, sharing this feedback back with our HR team, with our DEI team, with each other, with our leaders, right? It helps to drive our DEI strategy. These sort of concepts and these topics might not be top of mind or easy to understand, or some folks might not even think that at all. And bringing this to the table really just helps us to provide perspectives that are different to our firm and our leadership and our HR. And so, I think we talked a little bit about inclusion and belonging. We talked about allyship. We talked about programming, and we talked about tons of other things. But I wanted to talk a little bit about other aspects of the networks kind of working together. And one of the things that I was thinking through was just professional development. And we talked a little bit about leaders and like leaders needing to show up as allies, but also seeing leaders that might look or feel like you, and having that sort of role model. I personally think a little bit about mentorship and sponsorship, and I've personally found that I had my own experiences where I wasn't as comfortable speaking to my team about something and was looking for a sort of mentor or a sponsor to ask them how they've navigated things in the past. And it's really worked for me. And the professional development piece, I do feel like I get a lot of leadership opportunities out of being a part of the networks. And for those of you watching, I also chair the Mosaic network. And so I get to work with all of our different networks and bring them all together, which is super exciting. But I wouldn't be presenting as much. I wouldn't be working with senior staff as much. I really wouldn't be putting myself into these vulnerable opportunities. Sometimes I wouldn't be sharing my story and storytelling as much as I do. And so I find that I've gotten a lot of really wonderful professional development experiences, as well as mentorship and sponsorship. And so wanted to open it up to you all and see if you all have any examples that you want to share, or maybe even specific programming that you have with either in the Out and Allies Network, or Candace, if you want to speak to anything that the Black Professionals and Allies Network has.
I can jump in. I have been a beneficiary of both the Out and Ally mentorship program, and I've also been connected through to a sponsor throughout as well. And I can say that these two individuals, I mean, these are pretty new. We launched the program this year, And obviously, mentors and sponsors provide different perspectives, but the fact that both of them are part of the LGBT community makes it a lot easier for me to connect and feel a little safer to be able to share my thoughts and share my career aspiration to, share a little bit more about my private life. So I have one that is based off of in the EMEA region, and then a sponsor who is based in the US. And even though, because I'm based in the Asia Pacific region, there's not very much LGBT representation in this area. So it does give me a little bit more of a global perspective. Through my mentorship program, I get a little bit of understanding about how Europe works and, what the different cultural nuances are there about the work itself, and also being LGBT in that space. And I'm also American, but I have not, to be frank with everyone, my entire working career had been in Japan. So there's a little bit of part of me that is still feeling like I don't really understand the American working culture and a little bit terrified of it. So, having that kind of relationship with someone more senior and having them have faith and provide you the space and give you the projects that give you a little bit more visibility has really made me, one, feel valued by the company and really appreciative of the employee networks for creating that kind of opportunity. So I think the professional development aspect of networks, and if networks really lean into that and really leaning into the community that they have, Ally or LGBT or whatever network they're in, it really helps, one, your employees feel more included, that sense of belonging. It really, really, peaks. So I think it's a really valuable system of programming if you are able to tap into a sponsorship or a mentorship program. But I am benefiting from both of those. So I really, really like to say nothing but positive things.
Thanks for sharing, Bryce. Yeah, I think sometimes just also seeing that role model being their authentic self and bringing their whole self to work, and then just knowing like, okay, like I have this sort of role model here. That's definitely also helped me in different times. And thank you for sharing your experience working outside of the U.S. and Japan, and talking a little bit about that, because at BlackRock, obviously we're a global firm, and so these conversations do look different in our different regions. And so I think it's also important to understand and take a step back. Candace and Whitney, I'll pass it to you to see if you have anything that you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say from my personal experience, I've been with the firm now for almost exactly 3 years. My anniversary is coming up, and this I came from the nonprofit sector before. BlackRock is by far the largest company that I've ever worked for, and even just my floor of our office in San Francisco was the largest office that I've ever worked in. So getting the sort of lay of the land here and understanding how things work, the Out Network was just like critical for that, because I was sitting in a room every month in our monthly meetings with folks who worked in all our different businesses. And, we have our America's Forum meeting, which happens once a month virtually. And then we get folks from all the offices coming in. When it came time for me to start looking to move into a new role internally, and that moment felt sort of overwhelming professionally because I didn't know how to approach that conversation. It was through conversations with folks that I knew through the Out and Allies network that I learned BlackRock actually really loves internal mobility. We love to help people move into new roles that will help advance their career, help them pursue something that they're interested in pursuing. And, that's how I learned how to approach that for myself and moved into the role that I'm in now. And so I think it's just invaluable to have that exposure to people in other parts of the business to help you understand how does the business work. And then, ultimately that helps you contribute more and do more for the business as an employee, because you understand how it works better.
One thing I'd like to add, I think, is that my lens through BPN is one of the ways that we actually bring in allies is through our mentorship, our advocacy, and our sponsorship. And I feel like that's been a true unlock for us, because it gives the people in our network, our Black professionals, opportunity to really engage with people who are ready to engage with them on the issues they're dealing with, right? Typically, you have to find a sponsor either through somebody that you already know, You don't really know what their willingness to talk about your issues might be, but that the network really acts as the bridge in that way. So not only do you have this advocate, this sponsor who is more senior than you, has more connections, can provide that exposure, but they're really thinking through the lens of your identity and through your lived experience as to how they can help you navigate the firm and maybe the specific things that you're dealing with as you navigate through. So I really, we are deliberate about how we plan our allyship programming around mentorship and sponsorship to try to think about that and to provide those opportunities specifically for our interns, but also at the 3As, which are admins, analysts, and associates. So I think need a bit more of that hands-on support. So that's been great and something we've been really focusing on since we've been remote specifically, so from 2020 to now, but even as we move forward and grow our network, which is still relatively new, to be fair.
Thank you for sharing that, Candace. And I couldn't help but smile because for those of you who are watching, we have these mosaic meetings where our leaders from the different networks convene. And Candace just used the 3A approach. And the 3A approach was brought up in our mosaic meeting by our professional network for executive and administrative assistants. And in an effort to help them feel more included and make them feel like they belong more, they had asked that if any networks do any professional development, if they can group them as the 3As, analysts, associates, and admins. And so it's so great to see the different networks really adapting these different best practices. And I think, again, speaking to the professional development and the mentoring and the sponsoring, what I think about when I think about our networks working together to ultimately contribute back to our DEI strategy, is also just the best practice sharing, right? Like we're all doing this on the side of our desks. Every one of us has a day job, and we're not full-time experts at being ERG leaders or BRG leaders or members even, or even allies. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, the importance of the best practice sharing, because I feel like, it helps our smaller networks who just started out with learning, and it helps when we talk about our governance and just even the way that we structure our networks. Like all of us are speaking to mentorship programs and professional development, and there's dedicated folks out there who cover that, right? And so just wanted to see if anyone had anything else to add on just the importance of us working together as ERG, BRG leaders in the effort of collaborating on events, yes, but also just best practice sharing and maybe something that you might have learned from another network that was a best practice.
Yes, I think, Abilities Network for the disabilities has been a network that is pretty new. It started up at least in the Asia Pacific region in 2019, right before the COVID pandemic began. And to be honest, disability is a very difficult conversation to have in the Asia Pacific region. I think not just restricted to Asia Pacific, but globally. And you know, being able to work without and being able to work with WIN, the Women's Initiative Network, who are much more established and a lot more strategic. It's really great to be able to talk with people who have been doing this for 10, 15 years and really have got a sense of what draws in people, what attracts the people to become committee members, what attracts people to just join as members, what kind of events are really interesting for people to become allies, and how many events a month should you do before people get burnout, particularly during the COVID situation. So being able to have that kind of collaborative information sharing and best practices has been very useful, particularly when you're starting a new network. Of course, each network has its own personality, so not everything is a right fit for it. But it's really great that you know the people that you can reach out to. They're experts from different networks, and there's no. I think this happens, to be frank about, with network. There's a kind of sometimes competition, cannibalization that occurs. If you don't encourage the collaboration, you can create competition. And so the fact that we have created this space where people are get the intention that we're meant to be collaborative. It gives permission for that best practice sharing and be able to improve all of the networks rather than make us feel like we're really trying to compete for each other's time and resources and all of that. So I think that's really, really another great aspect of the fact that we created this, mosaic and collaborative tool. So it's really great if you can set that up if you're a newer network, particularly in a newer region, and be able to connect with experts.
Awesome, thank you. And I just wanted to thank all of you for joining today. Candace, thank you so much for joining us as our ally today. We appreciate you coming to support the
Thanks for having
LGBTQ
me.
community. Whitney and Bryce, huge heartfelt thank you to both of you for all of the work that you're also doing in the Out and Allies Network and the many other networks that you're both a part of as an ally. Before we close out, I just thought maybe if we had a closing statement for each of us, if we maybe had advice to give folks out there who are watching, maybe something that they can walk away with, and maybe I'll start with Whitney.
Yeah, this is a big question, and Shaun, I feel one thing that Candace said that's really kind of resonating with me, and I've been thinking about is this idea of interacting with people who are ready to interact with you, like knowing that that there's a place where when you start a conversation with somebody, they came there ready to have that conversation, which is hard to come by with certain conversations in the workplace. And to me, that's like really, I've never articulated it that way. I was like so thrilled when you said that, Candace, because it really is such a succinct way of saying what to me is like the core point of employee networks and allyship. And so, I don't know about a piece of advice, but I would just say that like, there's some trust that comes with that too. We're all entering a space, trusting each other to keep it safe when we're working within employee networks or ERGs, and certainly when we're leading them, and there is some responsibility to that. But it's also really liberating to know that everybody who enters that space is entering that space at least curious, and ready to learn. And so I think it just facilitates really beautiful and important conversations that can happen. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know about advice, but I think that I really try to hold on to here in my role is to just stay open to that, to be always asking questions, to be always curious, to remember that's why we're all here. And, for me as an ally to other groups, to really like take advantage of that and lean on that and ask what I can be doing better and how I can help.
Thank you, Whitney. Candace, any advice or comments that you would like? We don't need to
no
always
pressure.
have advice.
I think it all boils down to respect, right? We're all individuals living our own lives, but what we want is respect, and we want in the workplace to feel like we can just be ourselves. So the idea of belonging, I think, is even more simplified. Just, I want to be me, and I want to be respected for that, and I want to feel comfortable every day that I show up. I think there's a sense of empathy too that you gain when you're engaging as an ally, even as a member of your own identity group or network, and the identity that you relate to the most. That you're, having these one-on-one, intimate, and sometimes vulnerable conversations that allow you to grow as a person, that allow you to grow as a colleague, and to make you more thoughtful and intentional about inclusion. So, like I said before, a great privilege to be a leader of a network, to be an ally to your network, but definitely lots of responsibility to care for, to use your term, Whitney, to care for our colleagues and our friends.
Thank you, Candace. And Bryce?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I think the things that have resonated with me is really, I think, as Whitney said, and Candace, you really put it succinctly, is networks in general and these mentoring and sponsorship programs is really a collection of people who are ready or interested in having that conversation with you, which is something that we should really highlight. And I think, when we think about collaboration, I think what I previously said, I think giving people the permission, creating that sense of like we are putting allies first, getting people to make sure that they feel okay to join these spaces. And once they have joined, you know that you have DEI loving fanatics who are joining, because those tend to be the people who start to show up at these places and really fully utilizing them. I think it's really, really important. So I would just say to start giving permission to yourself, to the people that have joined, and your future joiners, and the collaborative aspect, and then just for the allyship part. And I think you will really create a more inclusive and a lot more sense of belonging in your company cultures.
Thank you all for sharing that. And I couldn't help but think about the tagline for our network mosaic, which is that we're all in it together. And I think this conversation really just painted that picture of we're really all in this together, and we want to make a difference, and we want to make BlackRock a really safe place. And so we are excited for all of you who listened to us, and we hope that maybe you learned something today about how maybe ERGs and BRGs can work together to drive allyship and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a huge thank you to Out and Equal. And again, a huge thank you to Candace, Whitney, and Bryce for joining me today. And take care, everybody.
Thank you.